is after what Hamas did on October the 7th, what is morally justifiable in terms of a response by Israel? And I don't have the answer. I'm just curious what you think it is.
So number one, it is not indiscriminate killing of civilians, and that is almost certainly what we had in Gaza. 85% of Gazans are now homeless because 70% of the buildings are either destroyed or damaged. So what they did was one of the biggest war crimes we've ever seen in our life. That is not a proportional response. I've said on your show before, I think they should go in with special forces. You have to get the hostages, and I understand that you've got to go after the Hamas fighters, okay? And that is fair. If you attack from your territory, you should expect special forces back. Special forces work. They worked in the case of bin Laden, and oftentimes they worked in the case of ISIS. We did not do giant bombings of Iraq, Syria, etc. We had plenty of war crimes on our hands too, as America executed the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, but nothing on the scale of what Israel has done. To give you a sense of it, we killed less civilians in 20 years in Afghanistan than Israel killed in 2 months in Gaza. So they dropped 29,000 bombs in a city the size of Las Vegas. The sheer terror of that is indescribable. So you send in special forces, you do something. But most importantly, this goes to your question about how is it different than ISIS and how to resolve it. ISIS doesn't represent anyone. ISIS doesn't represent an ethnic group. They claim they represent a religious group, but they're radicals and they don't represent Muslims at all in general, right? But Hamas is fighting a war because of the occupation. And the occupation of the Palestinians is untenable. So every day that you have an occupation, you're going to have a resistance.
And it's undeniable that there's been an occupation.
Yeah.
And we know that because when this latest war started, the fact that Israel was able to turn on the taps of energy and water, fuel and so on, the fact they could do that, stop the food coming in and out, that is what an occupation involves. It means you control somewhere which is not legally yours to control, and you're controlling it. So I don't think you can argue, whoever side you come down on this, you can't argue against the idea that there's been occupation, nor can you argue that a lot of the more right-wing members of Netanyahu's cabinet, some of whom are extreme far-right people, that they have no concern about what is happening and would be quite happy to see all 2 million Palestinians gone. And they would love to just take that land. Now, that's also undeniable, which is one of the reasons why Netanyahu has dug himself into a very difficult position politically, I think, for his own future, by packing this cabinet with all these hard right people purely to get himself elected prime minister again. He now finds himself under their control.
Yeah, there's no question about a whole heap of talking points that we hear nonstop in America. Some people do sophistry and say, well, is it technically apartheid, technically occupation? What difference does it make? As you point out, they control those areas. Those are open air prisons. They can cut off the water, power, electricity anytime they want. The Palestinians can't control their own borders. It's obviously oppression by any name. And then they say, oh, Hamas uses human shields. Well, they live in an area that is filled with civilians that you keep in an open-air prison. So
that doesn't mean Hamas don't use them as human shields. I don't actually think Hamas has shown by its behavior in the last 17 years where they've had power in Gaza that they have any real concern for the welfare of Palestinian civilians.
No, I don't think they do. Hamas is Muslim fundamentalist, and so whenever you have oppression, unfortunately, fundamentalism grows. That's a great breeding ground.
So there can't be a future with Hamas in charge, can there?
Yeah, I don't think so, no.
I mean, let's cut to the quick here about how this ends.
Yeah.
People talk about the day after the war. How do you think this ends, and what is the smartest way for everyone to go forward when the war is over?
So let me handle that in two ways. The current path that Israel is on is, well, Hamas made us kill all your kids. That's an absurd thing to claim. If you're so powerful, why is Hamas making you kill their civilians? That's absurd. And then they say, oh, the war ends when Hamas surrenders. Nobody thinks they're going to surrender. That's an absurd standard. What are they going to say? Okay, oh, I'm right here. Come and bomb me, or come and arrest me. So but there is a real way that it can end. So you make a deal with the Palestinian Authority, and the Biden administration has finally woken up and begun to go in this direction.
But they are totally discredited, riddled with corruption.
That's right. But I'll tell you how you fix that problem. It's in one bundle. It's actually relatively straightforward. You take the Palestinian Authority, which you are right, is reputationally damaged, not just in Israel, but more importantly with the Palestinians for collaborating with Israel for all this time for the occupation. You make a peace deal with them, you do the two-state solution now, right now. Not 20 years from now, not after 50 years more of occupation. You do it now, and you do it with the Palestinian Authority. That then buys them the credibility to be able to go and control Gaza. If they go into Gaza now, they look like collaborators. But if they go into Gaza with a peace deal and say, we got a Palestinian state, then they have enough credibility to be able to control Gaza and the West Bank and be a real partner for peace. Piers, you know that isn't the real problem. Abbas would probably do that deal in a minute. That's a lifeline for him, and he gets to be a hero. Netanyahu says, I don't want the deal. He said, I'm so proud that I blocked the Palestinian state, and I'm going to keep on blocking it. So there is one person totally responsible for the carnage, Benjamin Netanyahu.
I mean, I would say Hamas is also responsible. I would say that Netanyahu is very damaged. He may not survive this himself. And he is at the behest now and under control of his right-wing cabinet, which is incredibly unfortunate for those like you and I who would like to see peace be achieved here. How long do you think this war is going to go on for?
So we have a problem with Netanyahu on a second front, which is that he's corrupt, he has these charges, he's lost the Israeli population, and I don't want people making assumptions about Israel and the people that live there. Look at how unpopular Netanyahu is with his own population, right? And there is no democracy in Israel overall because they imprison 5 million Palestinians, but there is democracy within Israel itself for them, right? And within that democracy, you have a vibrant media, et cetera, that criticizes Netanyahu. So the reason why I say Netanyahu is primarily responsible is because even if you blame Hamas, and that's fair, well, he's the one that aided and abetted Hamas. He's the one that helped them get funding. He's the one that thought it was a brilliant idea to have them as a counterweight to the Palestinian Authority.
He liked the fact it fractured the Palestinian politically.
Exactly. He's the one that let his guard down on October 7th, and he was busy helping the settlers oppress the Palestinians in the West Bank and didn't help his people. But since the only thing that keeps him in power, especially at this point in time, is the war, he has a built-in incentive to never end the war. So somehow the Israeli population has to regain control of their government. And you know, in a parliamentary system, that's easier than in a presidential system. And so they've got to call for an election, and they've got to get the guy out right now. Hey, we're going to get him out after the war. Means that you're going to have endless war.
But the problem is the polls show that whilst there's a lot of unpopularity for Netanyahu, and he would certainly lose an election if it was held tomorrow on that basis, and a lot of it is driven by, they blame him for what happened on October the 7th. There's also widespread support in Israel for what the IDF are doing in terms of response. So you have these two things running concurrently.
Yeah.
Netanyahu personally very unpopular, but what the IDF are doing under his command as prime minister is very popular.
Yeah. So look, there's two issues. One is Netanyahu is in charge and we don't have elections and we can't get him out even though the Israelis want him. Second, want him to get out. The second issue is, you're right, it's not just an Netanyahu problem, it's an Israeli right-wing problem. And right now, the rest of his cabinet is a bunch of monsters, ghouls and goblins, who are openly, brazenly talking about ethnically cleansing the Palestinians in ways that are sometimes even more vicious than Netanyahu. And talking about starting a war in Lebanon, starting a war in Iran, that is insanity, total insanity. So, look, at some point, if the Israeli population does not choose peace, we're all doomed for endless war in the Middle East. But if the Israeli population in an election chooses peace for the first time since Yitzhak Rabin, then all of this can be solved. And relatively quickly, Saudi Arabia still says they want to do an agreement with Israel. Most of the Middle East wants to do a deal with Israel, and Palestinian Authority wants to do a deal with Israel. The people blocking that is the right-wing government of Israel. Get in a moderate government in Israel, and we could end this thing forever.